She was the one hunting terrorists.
She made impacts to national security that we won't know about for decades to come.
She had survived cancer.
She spoke 5 different languages and multiple different dialects of those languages. A combat veteran serving at the highest levels of special operations.
I think it's really important to tell the stories of people who haven't had their stories told before.
While serving at this high level of special operations and raising a family, and most of her life is and will be classified for the foreseeable future.
We're here to tell Shannon's story.
I think at the end of the day, maybe this is that book that the intelligence community can point at and say, this is us. We're not Shannon, but the Shannon was the best of us, and this is all our story.
And he was just like, hey, I'm going to tell you what we know. We don't know much right now. He's like, but there's been a suicide bombing in Manbij. There's 4 U.S. killed. 2 of them are women. You know where Shannon is. And I was like, fuck, she's in Manbij.
America is at war.
On January 16, 2019, Shannon Kent and Scotty Wirtz, they linked up with cross-functional team Manbij, or just CFT Manbij. They rolled out in a convoy that morning to go conduct a routine patrol, but what the purpose actually was is so Shannon and Scotty could peel off and go conduct a meeting outside of a local restaurant. They set up, synced watches, confirmed their time to be back, and they all kind of went their separate ways. Another intelligence soldier, Devin Clark, went up to the 2nd floor of the restaurant to provide overwatch. A few people stayed with the vehicles. The rest of CFT Manbij went out on their foot patrol, and Shannon and Scotty went off to go do what I now just call Shannon stuff, because all of it is classified. It was about an hour or so later that they linked back up again and were getting ready to load the vehicles up. They were just doing their quick little debrief on, hey, we got this, we got that, and go load vehicles. It was at that moment an ISIS suicide bomber walked into the middle of their group and detonated a suicide vest. The blast was significant. It immediately killed Senior Chief Petty Officer Shannon Kent, former Navy SEAL Scotty Wirtz, Green Beret Warrant Officer Jonathan Farmer, and an American interpreter, Gadir Tahir. It was chaos right after that explosion. It was sudden. They weren't anticipating something like this going down, but the enemy always has a vote. You know, you have to be right every time, they only have to be right once. They were out there by themselves. There wasn't some sort of QRF on standby for them. There wasn't really anything that they could do besides fend for themselves. And fortunately, there was an American helicopter that was unaffiliated with the mission, but was flying nearby and saw the smoke plume. The people on that helicopter were also special operations personnel. So they went and landed and immediately started running and jumping into vehicles and doing what they could to get down to the blast site and provide help. It took multiple hours to be able to find everybody again, because the fallen Americans were at 3 different medical facilities. They had to work through the locals to figure out where people were taken and then go recover them. From what I understand, Shannon Kent was the last one recovered, and that sort of officially began the process that is put in place when any American dies overseas. There's a notification process that begins. Joe Kent, her husband, was actually also deployed, not to the same country, but another spicy region.
I got back from being outside the wire myself, and then a mutual friend of ours, I won't say his name, but he was my boss, and he was just like, hey, I'm going to tell you what we know. We don't know much right now. He's like, but there's been a suicide bombing in Manbij. There's 4 U.S. killed. 2 of them are women. You know where Shannon is. And I was like, she's in Manbij.
Basically, Joe's worst fears were come true, and now he was a single father, and he knew he had 2 young boys back home that he needed to get home to. Everything changed in that moment. He knew that he would have to leave behind his career at the CIA. He needed to be home with his boys.
I got to figure out something completely different, and I didn't really have a plan. You know, I was like, I'm gonna find a job doing something, but really try and dedicate the most time to the kids.
He had to figure out what was next, and chief among those concerns was making sure Shannon's story was told. Joe and I talk, and already I'm kind of hooked on this story of who is this guy, who is his wife. She seemed incredible, and this is such a tragedy. He invited me down to the memorial service that they were going to do for her down at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. This was significant because Shannon Kent would end up being the first Navy enlisted sailor to ever be allowed to have a memorial service in the Naval Academy's chapel. It had never been done before. They had to get high-level waivers to get this done, but she was that special to the Navy community. And so on February 7th, I flew down to Maryland to link up with Joe, and I still remember sitting down with him at his family home, the place that him and Shannon were raising their kids, and I was so struck by how mission-focused he was on getting his wife's story out there.
I think it's really important to tell the stories of people who haven't had their stories told before.
Got a call from Joe, and he said, let's start working on a book.
2014, whenever they signed that memo that women can finally go to combat, well, women have been in combat basically since the beginning of the GWAT, you know, and Shannon was one of them.
They were out hunting high-value targets. They were doing work at a level most people aren't even aware of even existing.
And through telling her story, I think there's a lot of other women that are either out now or still in that are like, okay, all right, our story's actually being told. Maybe I can tell mine as well. I think that's important.
She's a cancer survivor. She was the mother of 2 young boys. She was an artist, a gardener, a great cook, a lover of culture and movies. She was somebody that gave a shit. She was filled with love, and she cared about the people in her charge as a Navy chief. She cared about the people she worked with, her peers, and she cared about solving what ended up becoming what we now know today as a veteran mental health crisis.
And I mean, one of the last conversations I had with Shannon, I was just like, don't be the last person to die in a war that everybody's already forgotten about. You know, like just be careful, as careful as you possibly can. But you know, she was there doing her job, and their job was to be out front looking for bad guys, and that's ultimately what got them killed. I mean, I think there's only so many times you can be in this profession and be lucky.
We know that many of the people responsible for the attack in Manbridge that day met their ultimate demise at the hands of, again, American special operators. We're not here to tell a special operations tell-all or some sort of expose on the world of intelligence. We're here to tell the story of Shannon Kent and who she was and why she mattered, and hopefully inspire a few people when they read this book. Shannon called her cousin Sharon the following evening, the night before she was to leave. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Shannon said. I just like the way Joshy smells after bath time. She was not at peace with her decision to go on another deployment, but she'd already put on her proverbial war paint. Duty to country and duty to family are almost always mutually exclusive. A warrior like Shannon was rarely afforded the satisfaction of tending to one without sacrificing the other. But she was forced to choose between her love of family and devotion to duty for the first time. The time had come. Shannon's 3-year-old Colt was old enough to understand his mom was going to war. Mama, no fight bad guys, he told her. This trip, her 5th to an active combat zone, was different in that Colt and Josh would be at home without their mom for a significant period of time. And she knew deep down that the work she was going over to do was not exactly safe. She would be conducting intelligence operations on behalf of the U.S. This would mean going into contested territory in unmarked vehicles, often with nothing more than her wits and a pistol on her hip. Shannon gave her boys one final kiss, still struggling internally about leaving. She and Joe enlisted as parents to watch the boys while they drove to Shannon's point of departure. Will this be the last time I see the kids? She asked Joe as they began their drive.